Hello, my name is Andre Ward, and I'm the Associate Vice President for the David Rothenberg Center for Public Policy at the Fortune Society. Welcome to Both Sides of the Bars, a discussion-driven show that examines the legal perspective or the legal system from various perspectives, including people most impacted by the criminal legal system. On both sides of the bars, we discuss critical questions about how the current system works, its intersections with social justice, and we highlight the efforts that are being made to improve the lives of everyone that is affected by it. We ask you, both the viewers, to spread the word about both sides of the bars and share your comments on Twitter at Fortune S-O-C. Today's show is really important in that we're going to be discussing the topic consistent with what is going to be happening in the month of June. And the title of the show today is called The Impact of Being Transgender in Men and Women's Prisons. And so 52 years ago, the historic Stonewall Riots unfolded after police raided a gay bar in New York City. For several days, members of the LGBTQIA+ community gathered to protest a lifetime of injustice, discrimination, and violence, galvanizing activism that continues today. Although there has been vast progress since then, much work remains in achieving true liberation for the LGBTQIA+ community. The recent heartbreaking deaths of Layleen Polanco, Tony McDade, and Oluwatoyin Salau have shed light on the continued perpetuation of violence against Black and brown trans people. As current protests are voicing, it is imperative to elevate the fact that LGBTQIA+ people, especially those of color, are overrepresented and mistreated at every stage of the criminal legal system. The weekend of June 26th through 27th marks the 52nd anniversary of the Stonewall Riots, while June has become National Pride Month, a month celebrated throughout the globe with parades, festivals, and concerts. It's a time to celebrate, learn, and stand in community with LGBTQI+ people everywhere. Joining us today as our guest, we have none other than Jaya. Jaya is a full-time peer specialist at the New York City Justice Agency and a student at the Borough Community College, Manhattan Borough Community College, BMCCC. Jaya spent 6 years in an all-men's prison. Then, after becoming New York's first trans woman to enter a women's facility prior to gender confirmation surgery, she was finally able to relax, rewriting conventional wisdom about trans incarceration in the process. Today, she spends most of her time, according to Jaya, working to make our highly flawed and prejudiced judicial system better for communities, and also working with clients to improve their quality of life during and after their involvement with the criminal legal system. Jaya, welcome to Both Sides of the Bars, and thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to it.
And, it's really interesting, Jaya, you were my colleague here at Fortune, right? You came in first as a participant and then you obviously went on to become employed with Fortune and then moved on to some other pastures, right, to do other great work as well. So just really excited to have you in this conversation, especially during Pride Month, because it's so critically important that our LGBTQI+ community is represented, right, acknowledged, right, and also affirmed, right, for their humanity and their dignity and their ability to be treated equitably in society. But your experience is unique, Jai, right? The first person, right, and the first trans person in New York State to be transferred from a men's facility to a women's facility. And I guess I'll start there, right? And if you care to, like, what was that experience like for you, right? Considering conditions in prison overall, right? Then compounded with being a trans person, right? Talk to our viewers about what was that experience like?
Of course, thank you. So the experience of spending so much time incarcerated in a male-dominated facilities, is greatly different than having been transferred to a women's facility. In all honesty, unbeknownst to me at the time, it was the greatest decision that I could have made to me. I had turned down the opportunity quite a few times, especially when I was younger in the system, for multiple reasons. A couple of them being how would I survive? How would I be looked at, right? Would I be able to fit in? But most importantly, the first thing I said is, how am I going to survive? I really had to remove myself from the need to rely on others, and had to really focus on what it is that I wanted to achieve. And I absolutely did want to make it possible or contribute to the possibility of having trans women having trans women go to female facilities. I think that what I did was amazing in the end, but I also think that it opened up so many doors, and I'm so super happy that I decided to do that.
Absolutely. And again, your experience, right, and decision that you made and the agency with which you chose to make that decision is caused precedent. And like you said, has impacted so many trans women throughout New York State prison. But I would imagine, right, when we think about experiences of abuse, right, and disrespect and all that kind of stuff, may not be physically necessarily, but the kind of emotional trauma that people experience that are trans in prisons. Talk a little bit about that, Jaya, and what is that like, right, for folks? Because it's so important for people to understand that.
Absolutely. So the amount of stress that is on the shoulders of trans individuals incarcerated in facilities that don't match their gender is heavy. I can remember just nights of just being stressed, just the anxiety, the toll, feeling like I had to watch my back wherever I went. I couldn't go to the bathroom and feel safe. I couldn't go and eat breakfast, lunch, or dinner and feel safe. I couldn't go outside to the yard and feel safe. And these are things that I wasn't accustomed to prior to being incarcerated. I was used to feeling comfortable and safe. And now being in a place where 24/7, I am constantly worried about what can happen to me. It takes a toll. It takes a toll. And you see it all the time with trans people incarcerated. It's hard for them to break the habits, the cycles that they may have had prior to incarceration, when they're focused really on how do they make it through this place safe. And sometimes that mindset can cause an individual to act out in ways that they normally wouldn't have. For example, and a big one for me, and I think for a lot of trans people who are incarcerated, is self-validation. Where do I find my validation? And in a man's facility, you find it within the men. That to me is not healthy. It's not healthy. And it's also a culture that is enforced and really projected. Because when I used to go to a new prison, it didn't matter what kind of person I was, right? That didn't matter. What mattered was the color of my skin. What matters is how much of a woman that I looked like. What matters was how long my hair was, right? And these are things that become habits. These are things that you expect. So instead of me for the greater part of my time incarcerated, worrying about things that could really improve my quality of life on the outside, I spent a lot of time worrying about how I can survive in this, right? How can I play this part that everyone thinks that I should play, to make it out of here safe.
And, I can only imagine, right, Jai, the impact, like you said, and the heaviness with which you had to carry, the stress of like being concerned about others and your own safety in that way. But then something happened, right? Throughout all of that trauma, all of that stress, which we know obviously is really hugely traumatizing, right? Some law was passed, right? And so you got the opportunity to transition out of a men's prison into a woman's prison. So what was that experience like for you, knowing in terms of the victory, right, of being able to be where your gender is assigned to, right? And so talk a little bit about that feeling of obviously getting to know news about you being transferred to a woman's facility.
It was extremely overwhelming. I didn't really know how to feel about it at first because there was so much unexpectedness. I knew though at my core that I was grateful to do this. I was happy to be a part of this movement because I wanted to play a part in making this accessible for every trans woman and trans man incarcerated, right? Because if I chose not to do it, maybe that would have slowed the process down, right? So 6 months can mean a stabbing, a cutting, can mean a sexual assault for a trans individual in prison. So the faster that I took this opportunity and made it through, the more comfortable I felt with the system actually setting up a course, a procedure for this to be more frequent.
Mhm. Yeah, and so, obviously just overwhelmed with feeling, right? Knowing that you were going to be in a place where you would be acknowledged for who you are and identified as. And so when you got to women's facility, like what was that like for you?
Yeah.
Did the women there have like questions for you? Et cetera? Well, they probably didn't know, right? But what was that experience like going to the women's facility?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm going to tell you about the first 30 seconds I was there, the first 2 minutes I was there. I remember we pulled into Takana Correctional Facility and the van stopped. So the door opens and a sergeant and a captain, I believe, or a deputy, they open and they say, "What is your DIN number?" And I say 12A5516. And they say, "Not anymore." And I said, "Excuse me?" And they were like, "You are," I forget, 10G something something. And I was like, "Okay." And the next words out of the mouth was, "You have 90 days left. We want you to make it through here with no problems. We don't want anything to happen while you're here. So we don't want you disclosing your gender identity. We don't want you telling people." And it kind of struck me and I was caught off guard. I really didn't know how to respond to that in that moment. I just knew that I had extreme mixed feelings about it. So I got my stuff together. I went up to my dorm and nobody really gave me a second look. They did probably because I was new. But the first thing that I did after I put everything away is I went to every girl I could find and I disclosed. I said, "Hi, I'm Diamond and I'm transgender." Some were blown away, but on the whole, they were very accepting, very accepting.
Yeah, and so I would imagine with the precedent that your case has set to allow for other transgender women and men to be in those facilities assigned to their gender, right? I can only imagine how grateful they are to you. What kind of reception do you receive, like from the trans community, knowing that you obviously are a real leader in this way, and that what you have done has set precedent for so many others to benefit from? What does the trans community, I mean, I'm sure folk reach out to you often and talk to you. What does that feel like?
Yeah, occasionally somebody will reach out to me and they'll want to know. Maybe they'll read an article online about me and they'll have questions. And I answer them as openly and honestly and as full as I can. But again, it is a great thing that I did, and I'm so happy that I did it, right? But this has been the work of so many individuals that work within docs. And we just can never forget that this came from people who, within docs, again, who really want to work to change the system for the better. But it's always great when someone says, like, "I appreciate that," or "Thank you so much." I can't imagine, doing that after spending so much time being comfortable in one place. And it feels good. It feels so good.
And like you said, there were those within docs that also supported in some way, but I'm sure there was this external kind of support from the LGBTQI plus community. And in honor and recognition of Pride Month, right, over 50 years of struggling and fighting to ensure that LGBTQI plus folk are dealt with equitably. What was that like to know that you also had support from the community, the LGBTQI plus community?
Yeah, of course. And not to take away any credit from my community, because my community has fought for things like this. My community has fought for changes like this. My community wants to put us in safe places, in places that condone healthier lifestyles, get us into places of school and work. And it's great. I love the trans community so much. I love the LGBTQ community because one thing that we are very good at is coming together as a family. And trying to make our lives better. Yeah.
And when you talk about family, right, I know that, all of us have places to which we go, right, that we seek refuge in, that supports us and empowering us and making us feel better and all that kind of stuff. And so our viewers who are watching this, right, who are part of the LGBTQI plus community, trans community, right, what are some of the things that you can say to them, right, to keep them inspired and hopeful, right, that no matter what challenges the community is facing, right, that we're going to get through this?
Yeah, for sure. You're amazing, you're talented, you're beautiful, you're great, and you have a strength inside of you that can take you places. Remember that you belong in spaces, and you deserve to show up in your full glory. You deserve to be there. You deserve to be in that seat, right? You deserve to be a part of the thing. Don't ever feel like you're entering a space at a disadvantage, right? You own the room that you live in, that you work in, that you thrive in. And remember, every hallway is a runway, you know? Get your life.
So, you know, you're in school now, Jaya, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So,
I am.
So what are you doing in school? Talk a little bit about that too for our viewers, right? Because it's really inspiring. You know, you're a trans person, but in the end, you're a human being, right? Just like everybody else. You do human being stuff, right? And you're in school. So what are you doing in school?
Yeah, so I'm actually studying to get a degree in criminal justice with the end goal of a bachelor's degree in criminal justice management. I believe that school is very important. School opens many doors, many doors. And I've always told myself, if I want to sit in the seats of the white patriarch, I need to have an education and I need to present a case for myself. I need to always advocate for myself. And school is such a big flex. School is such a big opportunity to really ingratiate yourself into culture that would otherwise say trans people don't belong.
Mm-hmm. And have you considered teaching one day, Jaya? Is that something that you've thought about in their experiences, both inside and out? Have you considered teaching in some way?
Not teaching, but I have considered another option, to be honest. I believe that support while incarcerated could do so many great things for people. I think that there should be people who have lived experience, but also the agency and also and also have the life experience, I'm gonna say, inside of these facilities, inside of these institutions, right? Preparing people who are incarcerated for the outside, because I know when I was in prison, both male prison and a female prison, there was nobody like me to tell me how life was out here. Nobody to tell me, you know? And that is lacking within the system. What's lacking is people who have that lived experience really helping people transition home. But so, teaching, consider it.
Yeah. So people, right, coming home, being supported, right? Which leads me to ask, like, what is some of the current work you're doing, right? You're doing some great work now. What is that work? How do you feel about it?
I am a peer specialist with the New York City Criminal Justice Agency. I love the work that I do. I work pre-trial. So I am assigned a caseload. And I work with case managers, but I work on a more personal level. I meet people where they're at. I'm no better than, right? We are the same in this work, right? And how do we work together to create a plan that really speaks to people's ability to grow, and to people's ability to change and live healthy lifestyles? I love being that support. I love connecting people to services. And I also love the amazing feedback from my clients. I think that we all need support, right? But also people going through the system, they need to have constant support. And it's so much different when you talk clinical, right? Because on the clinical side of it, those case managers, they can't really get deep. They can't really get personal. So people can feel a disconnect. I'm a peer specialist. I can build those bridges and create those bonds. And I love doing that.
Yeah. And so, you know, when you think about that kind of work, Diamond, and this is how you were when you were at the Fortune Society, right? The same kind of spirit and energy and just desire to empower others and inspire them. And so, I mean, people that are inside, right? Mm-hmm. And people that are coming home that are part of the trans community, What is some of, like, do you know if there's any legislation that's being pushed now to support that community? If you do, talk a little bit about that. Any policies, anything, any activism is happening to change legislation somewhere to make the lives and the conditions of trans people better? Is there anything you can talk about related to that?
Yeah, for sure. So there's always things happening, right? There's always push for reform, right? But reform as it works towards the trans community, because as we know, different communities have different needs. And so what are some of the needs that trans people have coming home? And a lot of them are the same, but a lot of them are also vastly different. And these things need to be targeted differently. So yes, there are things that are happening, right? There's definitely legislature that speaks to making lives for trans people more comfortable, especially upon release and within the system. Like, as we know, I'm sure most people watch the news. There has been this back and forth with healthcare and trans people. And finally, we got a victory, right? They're not going to take away or health insurance companies and agencies are not allowed to discriminate against the trans community. So kudos. But these are things that we fight with on a daily basis. Why does the trans community have to fight for things that should be for everybody? Mm-hmm. Why should I have to prove myself to have health insurance? Why should I have to lie on paper to have health insurance? Why do I need to do these things, right? So yeah, small victories, but they're never done. They're never done.
And so, you said small victories, Jai, and mm-hmm. they're never done. If Jai had the perfect opportunity to create the perfect world for perfect people, right? Our trans community, what would that world look like for folk, right? What again, you talked about specific needs that the trans community has. What would some of those things be if you had your druthers? What would you create?
Pathways to employment for sure. Pathways mm-hmm. to housing for sure. Trans people are discriminated in housing and employment. It happens, right? Quite often. We need to have pathways that secure housing and pathways that secure employment for trans people. Because it's sad how many people don't take the right steps because their conditions tell them that they can't. And what I mean by that is, if I'm homeless, right, and if I'm living on the street, if I'm prostituting, I'm not worried about my education. I'm not worried about these things, right? But I also can't do these things and take care of myself. That's a problem. So why aren't there things set up or policy? Why isn't there policy in place that leads people who are at a disadvantage into places where they can have an advantage, where it's not so daunting. It's not so daunting. For me, it was tough. It was tough. It was tough making the transition because I didn't know, and because I was also fearful. I remember walking into the Fortune Society for the first time in Long Island City and being fearful, not because of staff, all right? I didn't know anything about Fortune, but because I didn't see myself in that I belonged. And that speaks nothing against Fortune, of course. It speaks to trans people being afraid to enter spaces where they're the minority. And that to me is sad. That's a problem.
And so the idea is obviously helping to integrate these spaces in a way that all people can feel comfortable being themselves, especially trans people. And it's interesting, Jai, because when you were first working in the reception, right, you made people feel that way when they came through the doors, right? People would come in, hey, how are you doing? Welcoming people, creating a space for them that was embracing and welcoming, etc. And then you went on to do some other work as peer coaching stuff that you were doing. So all of this experience, right, Jai, that you've had and are having, like, how do you feel today?
I feel amazing. I know I do great work. And I've also met a lot of great people along the way. I'm happy that I continue to do work that helps people. I love the people that I've met. I loved working the front desk. Let me just say that. I loved being the face, and I loved really making people's day, right? Or at least I think that I made people's day. But it was great to be in a position to make a change to make a change in people's attitudes. I love projecting. I think that I'm super happy most of the time. And that's very contagious, but I like putting myself and opportunities that allow me to work with people, because I think I'm very contagious in like the best way.
And so, Jai, how can people get in contact with your organization, right? Because I'm sure that people could benefit from what your organization offers. And what are some of the communities that folk who identify as trans or part of the LGBTQI plus community can go to learn more, to become a part and involved? If you can talk about maybe a couple of those organizations that you may know off the top of your head, and then the organization that you work with.
Right, so there are many, many organizations. One of my favorite, and one that has helped me really since I first entered the system, was the Urban Justice Center, or the Peter Cicino Youth Center. But this is an agency that works with people from all spectrums, primarily youth, from the ages of like, I think 16 to 24, but they do work with everybody. And they do target very specific needs. Needs with LGBTQ people, needs with people who are undocumented. And they're very good at keeping the sanctity of privacy. And I live by them. I love the agency, and I think they do great work. Sylvia Rivera Law Project is another one. I absolutely love them. They do great advocacy work. They're always in the community. They're always in the community doing something. Their Instagram page is always very educational. It's very in front, right? What's another one? Destination Tomorrow in the Bronx is another amazing one. So if you're in the Bronx and you're LGBTQ, I've been there a couple of times. There's amazing people in there. It's like a giant family. And to speak where I work, again, I work for the New York City Criminal Justice Agency. They do have a helpline. There's also an Instagram page, so NYCJA on Instagram. Like, follow, all the information is there. They do upload various tips to anybody who are pre-trial. So like if you have an open case and you have questions, concerns about court dates, court parts, please give their helpline a call, and the associates will be more than happy to assist you.
Jai Diamond, thank you so much for joining Both Sides of the Bars. And in honor of Pride Month, we really appreciate you and your leadership and taking time out to join us at Both Sides of the Bars. My name is Andre Ward. And as always, we thank you, the viewer, for listening to Both Sides of the Bars. Be well.